You wake up tired, even after sleeping. You tell yourself today will be different. You try to focus, but your mind drifts. You open your phone without thinking. You start a task, stop after a minute, then start again. You promise discipline, then choose comfort. You've been here before. You plan routines that don't last. You feel busy but accomplish little. You know what to do, but you don't do it. At night, you feel the weight of it. The quiet guilt. The feeling that you're wasting your potential. This isn't just your problem. Almost everyone today feels this way. We live in a time built for comfort, not strength. Modern life makes everything easy. Food is instant. Entertainment is endless. Discomfort is avoidable. And slowly, discipline disappears. Your mind starts to feel like constant noise. Not loud, just never quiet. There's a reason for this. Your brain is wired to avoid discomfort and chase dopamine. Every distraction trains it to seek the easy path again. Over time, this weakens focus. It weakens follow-through. It weakens identity. This is where most people lose. Long ago, a different path existed. One built on discipline, not comfort. One practiced by warriors who understood the mind. That path was taught by Miyamoto Musashi. And at the core of his philosophy was a principle called Shuhari. Shuhari means learn, break, transcend. First, you follow strict structure. Then you refine it. Then discipline becomes who you are. Shuhari is not motivation. It is not willpower. It is a system for shaping identity. Musashi believed comfort weakens the mind. Discipline sharpens it. This principle matters because modern methods fail. They rely on motivation. They rely on feelings. Shuhari relies on structure, and structure outlasts emotion. If you understand this principle, you'll understand why discipline feels impossible today, and why it doesn't have to be. This is where everything begins. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell me in the comments the habit you want to master. Now, back to the story. Chapter 1. The story of Mark. Mark's day began like any other. The alarm rang at 6 a.m. He reached for his phone. The bright screen lit up his face. Another 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. He fell back to sleep. By 7:30 he was rushing to get ready. He missed breakfast, grabbed a coffee, and rushed out the door. His mind already scattered. The quiet, focused start to the day was lost. At work it was the same. He tried to focus on the report in front of him, but his thoughts wandered. He checked his phone again, scrolled through social media, then checked his email, then checked his phone again. By noon, Mark had accomplished almost nothing. The report wasn't finished. The email he'd promised to send wasn't even started. But the day had passed, and he felt like he'd worked hard. He hadn't. Mark felt this weight every day. The constant pull of distractions, of starting and stopping. The guilt would follow him, like a shadow. It wasn't just about his work, his relationships, his health, his future. He'd signed up for a gym membership last month but hadn't been. He'd promised to spend more time with his family but kept canceling plans. He'd wanted to read books but never finished them. And then, he'd promise himself, tomorrow I'll get it right. Tomorrow I'll be disciplined. But tomorrow never came. Every attempt at discipline felt like a battle against his own mind. The harder he tried, the more distractions seemed to pull at him. The more he focused on his goals, the further away they seemed. Every failure chipped away at his confidence, his belief in himself. The frustration grew. It wasn't just about missing tasks. It was the shame, the feeling of letting himself down, the constant reminder that everyone else seemed to have their lives together. Mark wasn't alone in this. Most people today feel this way. They start with good intentions but can't follow through. The comfort-driven lifestyle pulls everyone off track. Mark had tried everything. He downloaded productivity apps. He tried to wake up earlier. He followed motivational videos. But each time the cycle repeated. The distractions won. His discipline lost. The collapse happened quietly, as he sat at his desk one afternoon, looking at his phone again, mindlessly scrolling. He thought about everything he hadn't done, the habits he hadn't built, the projects that had been left half-finished. And then, a small voice inside him spoke. It wasn't an epiphany. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. He couldn't keep living like this. It wasn't a matter of willpower. It was a matter of identity. He realized the core issue. He wasn't a disciplined person. It wasn't that he couldn't discipline himself, it was that he never truly saw himself as someone who was disciplined. Motivation would come and go, but discipline had to be something deeper. In that moment, Mark understood the truth. The problem wasn't the distractions. The problem was his lack of structure. His mind had become a chaotic battlefield. If he was going to change, he had to reshape who he was. And that started with discipline, not as a temporary fix, but as a system, a way of living. And that's when he remembered Musashi's words. Shuhari. Learn. Break. Transcend. This was the beginning of his real training. Mark had spent years chasing motivation, but motivation never stayed. It was fleeting, always there at the start, but disappearing the moment things got hard. He needed something more, something deeper. Enter Master Takeda. Master Takeda was the kind of person who didn't speak much, but when he did, it was as if every word carried weight. He had lived a life of discipline, of focus, of constant growth, and he knew the one thing Mark needed: structure. One evening, after Mark had once again confessed his frustration, Takeda sat him down and spoke simply. "You're fighting the wrong battle, Mark. You're trying to control your actions without understanding your mind. The key is not motivation. The key is discipline, built through your identity." Mark listened intently, but the words felt heavy. "I've been disciplined before," Mark said. "I've done the routines. I've tried the self-help books. I've even tried your methods." Master Takeda nodded, unfazed. "You tried to follow them. That's not discipline. That's compliance." Mark sat back, confused. "Compliance? Discipline," Takeda explained, "is not following a rule. It is becoming the rule. It is who you become, not what you do." This was where Takeda introduced the first principle, Shuhari. Shuhari, Takeda said, is a principle from the samurai. It means learn, break, transcend. It is the path to mastery. It's not just a technique, it's a way of being. You cannot force discipline through motivation. You must make it part of who you are. Mark felt a flicker of curiosity. "But how? I've tried everything. How can I learn to be disciplined?" Takeda gave a small smile. "You begin by learning. First, you follow the system. Then you break from it, refining it to suit your growth. And finally, you transcend it. Discipline becomes you. It's no longer something you practice. It's who you are." Mark leaned forward. "But how does that help me? Right now? How does that change anything?" Takeda's gaze was steady. "You cannot force your mind to follow a system. Your brain doesn't work that way. The mind is like water, it needs a structure to follow. Without it, it's chaotic. Discipline is the vessel that shapes your thoughts." Takeda paused for a moment before continuing. Musashi knew this. He wasn't just a master of swordsmanship. He was a master of self-control, of inner calm. He practiced daily, but his practice wasn't rigid. It was fluid. And the moment he transcended it, discipline wasn't something he thought about. It was him. Mark sat back, absorbing the concept. For the first time, he felt a shift. This wasn't about trying to be disciplined in a rigid, forced way. This was about understanding that discipline was about identity. Master Takeda leaned in. "You've spent your life trying to follow the right habits. But habits don't define you. It's your identity. If you want to become disciplined, you must believe you are disciplined. And from there, everything else will follow." Mark was still processing, but something had clicked. Master Takeda's words weren't just philosophical, they were practical. He wasn't asking Mark to change everything at once. He was asking him to shift how he saw himself. Shuhari teaches you the path, Takeda continued. First, you learn the steps. Then, you break free from them. And finally, you transcend. You don't force discipline. You grow into it. Mark nodded slowly. The path was clearer now. This was the beginning of his real training. Discipline wasn't something he needed to chase. It was something he needed to become. And that was the first step. Chapter 2, The Fall. Mark stared at the clock. Another day had slipped away, and once again he had little to show for it. His list of tasks was still mostly unchecked, and the weight of the uncompleted work hung over him like a cloud. He had promised himself this would be the day he would turn things around. He had even set an alarm to wake up earlier, but it hadn't worked. The distractions were too strong. He couldn't get his mind to stay focused for long. It wasn't just the work. It was everything. His attempts to get fit had failed. The time he promised to spend with his family always got eaten up by something else. He had been saying tomorrow for months, and somehow, tomorrow never came. It felt like a cycle that wouldn't end, one failure leading into another, until the weight of it all felt unbearable. His frustration grew each day, compounded by feelings of guilt. He knew something had to change. But Mark didn't know where to start. He tried self-help books, watched countless motivational videos, and followed all the advice. Still, it was the same short bursts of productivity followed by long stretches of procrastination. His willpower couldn't hold up against the endless distractions. One day, after another frustrating work session, Mark sat at his desk, defeated. He had been scrolling through his phone when his colleague Brian passed by. Brian didn't need motivation. He was always on top of his tasks, always moving forward. Mark couldn't help but compare himself to Brian's productivity. It made him feel small, like he was always a step behind. It wasn't just about feeling behind. It was about feeling trapped in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. He had tried everything, but nothing stuck. Chapter 3, The Mentor. That's when Mark met Master Takeda. Takeda had a calmness about him that Mark immediately noticed. He was an older man, weathered by life, but there was a quiet strength in his presence. Takeda had been a close friend of Mark's father, and the two had crossed paths several times before. But now Takeda was offering to help Mark in a way that no one else had. Sitting in Takeda's small, simple home, Mark listened carefully as Takeda spoke. The conversation began with small talk, but soon Mark found himself opening up, sharing the struggles he had been facing. Takeda didn't rush to give advice. Instead, he listened, and then, in his own time, shared a piece of wisdom that would change everything for Mark. Discipline isn't about doing more, Takeda said quietly. It's about becoming something different. You see, most people focus on their actions, the things they need to do. But that's not where true change happens. It happens in who you become. Mark furrowed his brow, confused. What do you mean? Takeda continued. You're focused on getting things done, but you haven't reshaped how you think. Your mind is weak because it's used to running from discomfort. That's why motivation always fades. Motivation comes and goes, it's not reliable. What you need is discipline. Not as a force of will, but as a part of your identity. Mark was skeptical, but Takeda's calmness was compelling. What's the difference? Takeda smiled. The difference is that motivation depends on how you feel. But discipline, when it becomes part of you, no longer depends on how you feel. It's who you are. Takeda went on to introduce the ancient principle that would guide Mark's journey, Shuhari. Shuhari, Takeda explained, means learn, break, transcend. First, you learn the system, the basic steps. Then, you break from it, refine it, and find your own path. And finally, you transcend it. You don't just follow a system anymore, You become it. It becomes a part of you. Mark was intrigued but didn't fully understand. So, it's not about doing more or trying harder? Takeda shook his head. No. It's about reshaping who you are. Right now, you don't see yourself as a disciplined person. You see yourself as someone who struggles to get things done. That's the problem. You're not focused on the work, you're focused on the struggle. This was the beginning of Mark's real journey. Chapter 4. The First Steps. The first step, Takeda explained, was simple. Mark had to start with the basics. He needed to understand that discipline was not about trying to force himself to do things. It was about creating structure, breaking free from his old habits, and focusing on small daily improvements. Takeda showed Mark how to build his day around small blocks of time. The first lesson was simple. Start by waking up earlier. Mark had struggled with this for months, but Takeda helped him see it differently. It wasn't about willpower. It was about setting a non-negotiable routine. He needed to wake up at 5 a.m., no excuses. Not to rush into work or check emails, but simply to create the space for his mind to be clear before the chaos of the day began. At first, Mark resisted. The bed felt too comfortable, and his mind kept telling him to sleep for just a little longer. But he forced himself to follow through, starting with a single morning at 5 a.m. The next day, he did it again. It wasn't easy, but as Takeda had said, it was about becoming the person who woke up at 5 a.m. Slowly, it didn't feel like a battle anymore. It became part of his routine, part of who he was. The next step was about simplifying his workday. Instead of trying to do everything at once, Mark learned to break down his tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. He created clear, focused periods of work, no distractions allowed, and then took short breaks to reset his mind. At first, it was hard. His mind still wanted to wander, still craved the instant gratification of checking his phone, of avoiding discomfort. But over time, he began to notice small victories. He finished one task before moving on to the next. He completed a report he had been putting off for weeks. Chapter 5. The Setback. But even with these small wins, the road wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Life didn't stop throwing challenges at Mark. There were days when he fell behind on work. Days when he felt too tired to get up early. Days when his mind wandered off during his structured work blocks. The doubt crept in again. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this, he thought. Maybe discipline isn't for me. Takeda saw this self-doubt coming. The path of discipline is never straight. It's full of setbacks. What matters is not how often you fall, but how you get up. Takeda's words stayed with Mark. He realized that setbacks didn't mean failure. They were simply part of the process. He couldn't abandon the system just because things weren't perfect. Chapter 6. The Progress. Slowly, Mark began to get it. The system Takeda had taught him Shuhari wasn't about perfection. It was about continuous growth. Every day Mark made small adjustments to his habits, and each day he saw a little more progress. His mornings were no longer a struggle. Waking up at 5 a.m. had become second nature. His work became more focused and efficient. He wasn't just getting things done. He was starting to feel good about his work. And his confidence began to grow. He wasn't a person who struggled anymore. He was a person who focused, who worked, who disciplined himself. The change was noticeable. His coworkers began to comment on how much more consistent and focused he seemed. Mark noticed it too. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough to keep moving forward. Chapter 7. The Turning Point. One day, Mark realized something. He wasn't just following a system anymore. He wasn't trying to force discipline into his life. He had become it. Discipline wasn't something he had to work at every day, it was simply who he was now. I'm not trying to be disciplined anymore, Mark thought. I am disciplined. That was the turning point. Mark had transcended the system. It had become ingrained in his identity. He didn't just wake up early because he had to. He did it because it was who he had become. Discipline had reshaped him, from the inside out. This wasn't the end of his journey, but it was the moment when he realized the transformation had already begun. As Mark's transformation continued, he began to understand the most critical lesson that Master Takeda had taught him. Discipline isn't something you try to force. It's something you become. True mastery of discipline was not about rigid routines or following a set of rules perfectly. It was about adopting a system that worked with his life, reinforcing it daily, and integrating it into his identity. Mark's journey towards mastery wasn't instantaneous. It was a gradual process of applying 5 key principles. These principles didn't just shape his habits, they transformed how he saw himself. And through this transformation, Mark realized that mastery of discipline was something that could only be achieved by embodying it, step by step. Step 1. Simplify the approach. The first shift Mark made was recognizing that complexity was his enemy. For years, he had overcomplicated things. Every morning, he had tried to launch 1,000 different tasks, each one demanding his attention, and each one pulling him in a different direction. But now, following Takeda's guidance, Mark learned to simplify the approach. The key to mastering discipline wasn't about doing more, it was about doing one thing at a time, with full focus. Mark's new system was built around simplicity. Every morning he chose a single priority, something that mattered most. He set the intention to tackle one task, whether it was work, fitness, or personal growth, and committed to it fully. This approach allowed him to focus without feeling overwhelmed. It didn't matter how small the task was. What mattered was the clarity of purpose behind it. Step 2. Build consistency. The second principle that Mark embraced was consistency. He learned that discipline wasn't something that happened in a single burst of motivation. It was built over time, through repeated actions. This wasn't about huge leaps of progress, it was about consistent, small steps every day. Mark set up small, attainable goals, not grand, unrealistic expectations. The secret wasn't about achieving everything at once, it was about building a habit of consistency. Whether it was waking up at the same time every day or focusing for 45 minutes straight on one task, Mark created small wins every day. These little victories compounded over time, adding up to a larger sense of accomplishment. The more Mark showed up every day, the more natural it became. Consistency reinforced his new identity as a disciplined person. Step 3. Embrace repetition. Mastery doesn't come from doing something once and expecting perfection, it comes from repetition. Takeda had made this point clear. Musashi didn't become a master swordsman by practicing once. He practiced daily, repeating the same movements until they became second nature. Mark realized that repetition was the path to mastery. He no longer tried to force changes overnight. Instead, he committed to doing the same disciplined actions every day until they became automatic. Whether it was working out, focusing on a project, or avoiding distractions, Mark practiced it every single day. The more he repeated his actions, the more disciplined he became. He saw it in his work, his health, and his personal life. This repetition wasn't boring, it was empowering. Every time he repeated an action, it reinforced his new identity as someone who was disciplined. Step 4. Push through discomfort. Discipline, Mark learned, wasn't about avoiding discomfort, it was about choosing discomfort. Early on, he thought discipline would feel easy if he just followed the right routine. But soon, he realized that true growth comes when you push past your resistance. When the mind says, "I don't want to," that's when real discipline kicks in. Master Takeda had told him, "You'll face discomfort every day. It's the cost of growth. Don't run from it." Mark didn't always enjoy waking up early or pushing through hours of focused work. But he learned to see discomfort as a sign of progress. When he felt the urge to procrastinate, he remembered that the discomfort was simply part of the journey. Pushing through it meant that he was growing. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Discomfort became a tool for growth, a constant reminder that true discipline doesn't avoid the hard work, it embraces it. Step 5. Master your identity. The final step in Mark's journey was the most profound. Master your identity. Discipline wasn't something he had to remind himself to practice, it became who he was. Instead of constantly trying to stay motivated or forcing himself to stick to routines, Mark began to believe that he was a disciplined person. Every action he took reinforced this belief. He wasn't someone who had to try to be disciplined, he was disciplined. Mark's identity shifted from someone who struggled with motivation to someone who thrived on routine and self-control. He didn't see discipline as something external he had to force upon himself. It became an internal force, guiding his actions naturally. When he woke up at 5 a.m., it wasn't because he was trying to force himself to be productive, it was because discipline was who he was. And this new identity gave him the strength to keep pushing forward. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The process wasn't quick, nor was it without setbacks, but something had clicked deep inside him. The identity he was building, the one of someone who was disciplined, was no longer a concept he read about or tried to implement. It was who he was now. At first, the changes were small, almost imperceptible. A little more focus during his workday, a bit more energy when he woke up in the morning, a calmness he hadn't experienced before when faced with challenges. But over time, those small changes began to snowball. They weren't fleeting moments of success, they were part of a larger, undeniable shift. Mark was becoming the disciplined person he had once only dreamed of. Small wins, big results. It wasn't about big breakthroughs. Mark didn't wake up one morning to a perfectly organized life. Instead, it was the collection of small, seemingly insignificant wins that added up to a transformation. Each day he woke up at 5 a.m. without hitting the snooze button. He followed his time blocks, and when his mind wandered, he refocused. He stuck to his workout routines, eating healthier meals and staying consistent. And the results were there. His colleagues began noticing the difference in him. His boss praised him for his work ethic and focus. He started taking on more challenging projects and delivering them on time. People who had once seen him as inconsistent now saw him as reliable, steady, someone who could be counted on. Mark didn't just see external changes, he felt them too. His mental clarity improved. He wasn't battling distractions every minute of the day. He was able to focus for long stretches of time, uninterrupted, knowing exactly what he needed to do and when. There was no more procrastination or guilt weighing him down. There was only calm, controlled action. The transformation was not just external, but deeply internal. Mark didn't feel the anxiety he used to feel in meetings or when faced with deadlines. He wasn't overwhelmed by the tasks that once seemed impossible. He approached them with the same calm resolve that he applied to everything else in his life. There was a confidence now in his every action, one that came from knowing he had the discipline to follow through. The setbacks and the growth. But even in his transformation, Mark was not immune to setbacks. There were days when he felt exhausted, when the weight of the routine felt heavy. There were moments when his mind wandered, or when he missed a morning workout. He wasn't perfect, and he never pretended to be. But that was the key to his transformation. He didn't let the setbacks define him. Instead of seeing a missed day or a failure as a sign of weakness, Mark viewed it as a reminder to return to his system. He knew that transformation was not about perfection. It was about resilience, about continuing to show up, even when things didn't go according to plan. Each setback didn't push him backward. It reinforced the lessons he had learned. He understood now that failure wasn't the opposite of success, it was part of success. The real test of discipline wasn't in avoiding mistakes, but in continuing to move forward after them. Mark had learned to view discomfort, not as something to avoid, but as something to lean into. The moments when he felt the most resistance were often the moments where he grew the most. Every time he pushed through the discomfort, it made him stronger. It made his discipline stronger. The impact on others. The change was clear to everyone around him. At work, his manager noticed that he was no longer scrambling to meet deadlines. He was anticipating problems and solving them before they became issues. He was proactive, confident, and focused. His colleagues, once skeptical of his constant reboots, now admired his consistency. They began to ask him how he was able to stay on track, how he managed to keep up with everything without burning out. Mark wasn't sure how to answer at first. It had become second nature to him, part of his new identity. But the real shift came at home. Mark had always struggled to balance his work life with his personal life. He had let work bleed into his family time, his health, and his relationships. But as he gained more control over his habits, he found more time for the people who mattered. He started saying no to distractions. He made space for his family, for his friends, and for himself. He wasn't just living for the next deadline anymore. He was living for something deeper: his growth, his relationships, and his purpose. Mark began to experience what it meant to be present in his life. He wasn't distracted by guilt over uncompleted tasks, or anxiety over how he would keep up with his commitments. He was showing up as the disciplined person he had become, and that felt empowering. The shift in identity. Looking back, Mark could hardly recognize the person he had once been. He wasn't the same person who struggled with motivation, who fought every day to overcome distractions. That person had been replaced with someone who saw discipline as an intrinsic part of who he was. It wasn't something he had to force or try to achieve. He was disciplined, and that shift was the breakthrough moment. The transformation had come not from trying harder, but from becoming someone different. Mark had shed the identity of a person who lacked discipline. He had embraced the identity of someone who lived by it. And in doing so, he didn't just change his habits, he changed his entire life. He didn't just wake up early or work hard, he became someone who could do both, effortlessly, day after day. Now, Mark no longer relied on external motivation to push him forward. He didn't need the promise of rewards or accolades. He had his own internal drive, a drive that came from his identity. He didn't do it because he had to. He did it because it was who he was. As Mark's journey unfolded, he realized that the true essence of discipline wasn't about trying to live up to external expectations or chasing perfection. It wasn't even about getting more done or working harder. It was about understanding that discipline was the key to shaping who you become, and that the way to mastery was through identity. Throughout his transformation, Mark had discovered that the real power of discipline wasn't just in the actions it produced, it was in the deeper identity it forged. He didn't just wake up early because it was a habit. He woke up early because he had become someone who valued his time and used it purposefully. He didn't work late because he had to. He did it because he had become someone who believed that work had to be done well, no matter what. This shift in perspective was the heart of the transformation. Discipline was no longer a series of tasks to check off, it was who Mark had become. He had transcended the struggle, the constant fight against procrastination. What he once had to force himself to do was now just a natural part of his life. Takeda's teachings had shown him that the path to true mastery isn't linear, nor is it easy. There is no quick fix, no shortcut to lasting change. Mastery is a continuous process, one that doesn't end. It's about building a solid foundation of habits that become second nature, a steady, constant rhythm that allows you to grow. It's not about achieving perfection or avoiding mistakes. It's about embracing the process, accepting that setbacks are part of the journey, and continuing to show up every day. This was Musashi's path, Learn, break, transcend. The first step is learning discipline, the rules, the structure. The second step is breaking free from them, refining them to make them your own. The third step is transcending them, where discipline becomes an inseparable part of your identity. When you reach this point, you don't need to fight to be disciplined. It's who you are. It's automatic. It's natural. Mark had arrived at that third stage. He had transcended the need for constant motivation. His identity had shifted. Discipline was no longer something he did, it was something he lived. This is the deeper truth Mark learned. Discipline is not something you do when you feel like it. It's who you are. And in that realization, everything changed. Once Mark embraced the power of his own identity, he no longer fought with himself. He didn't have to force himself into productivity or self-control. He just became the person who naturally lived with discipline, day after day, year after year. Mark understood that true growth and transformation come not from pushing against the struggles of life, but from becoming someone who knows how to overcome them. Discipline, when it becomes your identity, is not a burden. It's your way of being in the world. Now, Mark was no longer trying to find motivation or willpower. He had found something far more powerful, a disciplined life. In the end, Mark's journey showed that identity shapes destiny. What you believe you are, you become. And once you've mastered that, the world is yours to shape. Discipline creates freedom. Identity shapes destiny. One path, one life. Before you go, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell me in the comments what habit you're working on. Now, back to your journey.